The studio gates always creaked slightly before opening, just enough to break the stillness of Hollywood nights. Keanu Reeves, sunglasses on despite the moonlight, pulled up in his usual silent manner. As expected, the gate was already half open, a figure standing by with a steady hand raised in a quiet salute. The old security guard Roy stood with his shoulders squared, jacket zipped up even on warm nights. He never asked for photos, never tried to chat, just nodded every time Keanu arrived. A nod that spoke of respect, routine, and something unspoken. Keanu always nodded back, nothing more. Roy had worked that night shift for as long as Keanu could remember. His presence was like part of the architecture, invisible but essential. He moved slowly but with purpose, always 5 minutes early, always watching the monitors with sharp eyes despite his age. Most actors barely noticed him. They came and went with entourage and noise. But Keanu noticed. There was something about Roy's posture. Always alert, never slouched, that resonated. Like a soldier long after the war had ended. Still on duty out of principle, not paycheck. One evening, Keanu rolled down his window a little more than usual. "You doing all right, Roy?" he asked in his quiet voice. The old man blinked, caught off guard, then offered a soft smile. "Always, Mr. Reeves. Thank you." That was all. But for some reason, Keanu drove in that night with a heavier feeling in his chest. It lingered. Roy was always there, solid, silent. And suddenly, that silence started to mean more than just professionalism. It felt like a wall hiding something deep. As the shoot weeks passed, Keanu began making small gestures, leaving coffee at the booth, a sandwich some nights. Roy always accepted with a polite nod, never speaking much more than a "thanks, sir." But Keanu felt the weight of that simple exchange. This was a man who had no need to impress, no need to be seen. And yet, somehow, Keanu saw him clearer than anyone else on set. That night, as Keanu walked into the soundstage, he turned for one last glance and caught Roy still watching. Not in a creepy way, just present, focused, like Keanu's safety mattered, like it always had. Keanu's car slowed as it reached the studio gate, headlights sweeping over the booth, but there was no one there. The small light above the booth was still on, flickering faintly, but the chair inside was empty. The clipboard with security logs sat untouched, and the gate itself, usually opened in anticipation of his arrival, remained firmly shut. Keanu paused. His hand hovered over the gear shift. He waited a few seconds, expecting Roy's figure to shuffle out from behind the booth or maybe from the side alley where he sometimes checked blind spots, but no one came. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his black coat as the chill of morning touched his neck. The silence was different today. Not peaceful but hollow. Keanu walked to the booth and gently knocked on the window. Nothing. Then he looked through it. A thermos still sat on the table, half full. The chair was slightly pushed back, as if someone had gotten up in a hurry. But there were no signs of a struggle, just absence. Keanu leaned on the frame of the booth, peering into the shadows. He could feel it in his gut. Roy had not simply taken a day off. This was something else. Inside the studio, people were buzzing as usual. Set decorators moved props. Assistants yelled over radios, and nobody mentioned Roy. Keanu asked one of the production managers casually, "Hey, where's Roy?" The man frowned for a second, like the name tugged at a distant memory. "Roy, the night guy, I think he quit a few weeks ago. Someone else has been rotating in." "Why?" Keanu did not respond. He just nodded and kept walking, but his thoughts stayed fixed on that empty booth. It was not just about Roy's absence. It was the fact that no one cared to notice he was gone. That night, Keanu stayed late after wrap. He walked back to the gate alone. The replacement guard was young, chewing gum, glued to his phone. No clipboard, no logs, no thermos. Keanu nodded politely, but he did not linger. Instead, he stood in the shadows for a few minutes, just staring at the booth. The old habits, the quiet rituals, all gone. erased without a trace. Roy had disappeared like a whisper, and no one even asked why. No goodbye, no farewell card, not even a mention in the staff memo. It hurt in a way Keanu could not explain. He was a man used to silence, but this silence felt cruel. 3 months had passed, filming wrapped, projects changed, faces rotated. But that small sense of something left undone stuck with Keanu. It hovered at the back of his mind like a name he could not place or a melody without lyrics. On a late afternoon shoot break, while walking alone near the side lot, Keanu took a shortcut past the old security booth. The area had changed, now mostly neglected. Trash overflowed from nearby bins. Weeds cracked through the pavement. But something caught his eye. A piece of yellowed paper, half crumpled, stuck to the booth's corner by wind and moisture. He knelt down, brushing away a soda cup. It was an envelope, old, wrinkled, sealed but stained. In the corner, written in shaky pen, "Mr. Reeves, to be handed privately." His fingers froze. The handwriting was familiar. He had seen Roy scribble names on log sheets with the same crooked capital letters. Gently, Keanu opened it. Inside was a folded letter, written carefully, deliberately. The ink had smudged in some places, but the words were intact. "Dear Mr. Reeves, I did not expect you to remember me for long, but I remember you every night. My son, he loved you, passed away before he turned 20. You reminded me of him, not your movies, your presence. You nodded to me like I mattered. After he died, I stopped talking much, but I still watched. You gave me something back without knowing it. I never said thank you, maybe because I was scared I'd cry. Guarding that gate was more than a job. It helped me heal. Thank you, Mr. Reeves, for seeing me." Keanu just stood there, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. The sound of the crew radios faded to a distant static. He read the letter again, slowly, then again. His breath caught in his chest. He looked toward the empty booth, the one everyone had walked past for months. Suddenly, that booth became a monument, not to security but to grief, to love, to a father who stood there every night, not just guarding a gate, but holding on to the memory of a son, a man no one had ever really seen. Except Keanu. Keanu folded the letter and tucked it carefully into his inside pocket. Then he walked back toward the main lot, slower this time, every step heavier. 4 months, Roy had been invisible in everyone's story. But now, he was becoming the center of Keanu's. And Keanu knew. This was not over. Something inside had shifted. Quietly, permanently. Keanu stood outside the chipped door marked 3C, holding the envelope in one hand, the other curled into a quiet fist. The apartment building was old, the kind with creaky stairs and mailboxes that rattled when touched. The manager, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, had recognized Roy's name immediately. "He passed a month back," she said. "Heart condition. Lived quiet. No family, no funeral. I was going to box his stuff up for charity." She offered Keanu the spare key without asking for ID. Maybe it was his face. Maybe it was the weight behind his eyes. The door creaked open into silence. The room was modest, almost bare. A single worn recliner, a small TV on a stand, and a bookshelf repurposed into a makeshift shrine. That was where Keanu's eyes locked. The shelves were filled with VHS tapes, each labeled in careful handwriting. Speed, April 1995. The Replacements, August 2000. John Wick, First Time, and dozens more. Beside each, post-it notes with dates, short reviews, and sometimes just single words like strength, reminds me, just like Matt. Keanu stepped closer, reading the scribbles like scripture. In the center of the shelf sat a framed photograph. A young man, maybe in his late teens, smiling with one arm around Roy's shoulder. His resemblance to Keanu was haunting. Not exact, but enough to stir something deep. The boy's eyes held the same softness, the same quiet grief hidden behind light. Keanu lowered himself to the recliner, staring at the photo, then at the tapes. Roy had not just been watching movies. He had been preserving memories, holding on to his son through every role Keanu played, treat as a ritual, a way to relive what was lost, and maybe what still gave him strength. He found another letter tucked in the frame's back. This one was addressed to Matthew. Keanu read it aloud under his breath, spoke of pain, of working the booth every night to stay close to something. Not the stars, not the studio, but the feeling of protecting someone. I protect people, son. That is all I ever knew how to do. And that man reminded me of you. Kind, quiet, hurt, but still trying. Keanu blinked, his throat tight. He sat there for a long time, hands resting on his knees, surrounded by old memories and silent devotion. Before leaving, he carefully packed the tapes, the notes, the framed photo, everything. He did not know exactly what he would do with it yet, but he knew it would not be left behind. Roy may have passed in silence, but Keanu would not let his story fade the same way. The man had stood in shadows, unnoticed by most, but to Keanu he was now a lighthouse, quiet protector, father grieving, and someone who, without asking, had given Keanu something too: perspective, purpose. A few weeks passed, and Keanu had spoken to no one about Roy, not his agent, not the crew, not the press. It was not their story. It was something deeper, something sacred. But what haunted him most was the final sentence in Roy's note. You gave me something back without knowing it. That line stayed with Keanu like a heartbeat. So he did what he always did when words failed. He acted, quietly, privately. He met with lawyers and quietly purchased a small, abandoned lot just a few miles from the studio. A place most people ignored on their way to bigger things. Just like Roy, the place was nothing more than cracked concrete and weeds, flanked by old fences and broken glass. But in Keanu's mind, it had already become something else: sanctuary, tribute. He called in his own crew, not architects from fancy firms, but old set builders he trusted, guys who had worked in the shadows just like Roy had, people who understood what it meant to create something real. Then step aside quietly when the lights came on. The only rule Keanu gave them: make it clean, make it peaceful, and name it after his son. They worked through the nights, not for publicity but because Keanu was there with them. Hammering, hauling, making coffee for the crew. Some recognized him, asked why he was doing all this. He just smiled softly and said, "Someone I respected deserves to be remembered." No further details, no name drops, just that. In the center of the build site, they laid the first stone foundation for a quiet retreat house. Matthew's place. It would serve as free, safe housing for retired studio workers. Security guards, janitors, prop haulers, the kinds of people who were rarely thanked, never photographed. Keanu oversaw everything personally. He installed a bench at the entrance with a brass plate that read, "For those who guard without being seen." Inside, a quiet viewing room would hold a glass case, and in it, Roy's framed photo of Matthew, the VHS tapes, and a replica of the old security logbook from the studio gate. Keanu never called a journalist. He never gave a speech. He simply stood there one morning when it opened, watching an old man slowly walk inside, drop his keys on the table and cry. That was enough. That was the point. The night was loud. Flashbulbs cracked like lightning. Reporters leaned over barricades shouting names, and fans screamed as stars stepped onto the red carpet. It was the premiere of Keanu's latest film, a massive release. Everyone expected a big moment, but when the door to the black SUV opened and Keanu stepped out, alone and quiet, the energy shifted. He wore a black suit, no tie, and his expression was calm. Not sad, not performative, just grounded. There was no practiced smile. Just a steady walk down the carpet, eyes ahead. A reporter near the front reached over and asked, "Keanu, you vanished for weeks during post-production." Everyone was wondering, what happened? The question floated in the noise. But Keanu actually paused. For the first time that night, he turned to the reporter. No microphone was raised. No cameras caught his full face. but he said, almost in a whisper, "I was building something for someone who never asked for anything." The reporter blinked, thrown off. "Was it for a friend?" Keanu nodded once. "A quiet friend. The kind you do not notice until they are gone." He did not elaborate. He did not explain. And yet, in that moment, something in the crowd softened. There was a long pause before the noise resumed. But it had changed. Reporters looked at one another, unsure whether to chase the quote or let it sit. Keanu walked past them with the same steady rhythm he always had. The world could spin in chaos around him, but he walked like a man anchored to something much deeper than fame. That night, headlines still ran about the film, but one line trended differently. Keanu Reeves honors unknown friend in silence. Inside the premiere hall, as guests mingled and lights dimmed, Keanu sat near the back. As the opening scene of the film played, his eyes drifted to the screen, but his mind stayed elsewhere. He reached into his jacket pocket and touched the envelope, now carefully laminated, always with him. The crowd watched a fictional story unfold, but Keanu was living a real one, playing no role but his own. And in the silence between scenes, he could still feel Roy's quiet presence, not as a ghost, but as a permanent part of his journey. It was early, too early for anyone to be up, except the ones with quiet lives and heavier thoughts. Keanu made his way down the path toward the entrance of Matthew's place, his breath visible in the morning air. He had started visiting once a week, usually alone, always before the city woke up, not to be seen, not to be thanked, but to feel something steady like Roy had once made him feel. Today was no different, but as he turned the corner, he paused. Someone was already sitting on the bench. She was in her 60s, a frail woman in a knitted sweater, holding a paper bag in her lap. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at the plaque, "For those who guard without being seen." Keanu slowed, not wanting to disturb her, but she noticed and turned. "You are him," she said gently. "The movie man." Her voice was rough but kind. He nodded softly and approached, sitting beside her without a word. A few moments passed in silence. Then she opened the paper bag and pulled out an old photograph. It was Roy, decades younger, standing with a group of factory workers. "I was his neighbor for years," she said. "He never talked much, but when my husband passed, Roy would leave food by my door. Soup, old fruit. Never knocked, just left it." She looked over at Keanu. "He used to hum your movie music sometimes. Said your characters reminded him of someone. I always thought it was you, but now I wonder if it was someone else. Someone he lost." Keanu said nothing, just listened. Every word she spoke filled in another blank in Roy's story, another shadow brought into light. Before she left, she placed the photograph beneath the bench, gently, like offering something sacred. "I come here now and then. I sit here and remember the ones who watched over others without asking for thanks." Keanu stood with her, helping her up as she wiped the corner of her eye. "You did something beautiful here," she whispered. "Not for show, for real." As she walked away, Keanu sat back down, the photo in his hand. He looked out at the quiet building. Windows dark, no fanfare, just a place of peace. Roy was gone, but now somehow he was everywhere. The room was quiet except for the gentle whir of the VHS player warming up. Keanu sat cross-legged on the floor, elbows resting on his knees, the framed photo of Roy and Matthew placed beside him. Tonight was the first time he dared play one of the tapes. They had been sitting in a box for weeks, alphabetized and labeled with care. He chose the replacements August 2000, not because it was his favorite, but because the post-it on its spine read simply, "He smiles here." The tape clicked into gear, static flashing before the studio logo appeared. It was surreal watching himself from decades ago. Younger, looser, filled with a different kind of energy. But what struck Keanu more than the performance was how carefully the tape had been handled. There were no signs of wear, no dust. This was not a fan's collection. This was sacred. The movie played as expected until midway through the second act, and then the screen suddenly cut to static. Keanu reached for the remote, assuming it was damaged, but then the static faded, and something unexpected appeared. It was a home video, grainy footage. The camera sat still on a desk aimed at Roy. He was sitting in his recliner, older, hands clasped, looking directly at the lens. "I hope this never gets watched," he said with a weak smile. "But if it does, then maybe I am gone, and maybe he found the tapes." His voice cracked slightly. "Mr. Reeves, I do not know how to say this without sounding foolish, but thank you, not for the roles, not for the movies, for nodding, for noticing, for being kind when no one had to be." His fingers trembled, but his gaze remained steady. Keanu stared at the screen, frozen. Roy leaned forward in the video, his eyes watery. "My son would have grown up to be someone like you, strong but not loud, hurt but never cruel. I could not save him. But seeing you made me feel like I still could protect something. You did not know, but you were part of my healing. So, if you ever see this, I just want to say, I was proud to stand guard for you. You were worth guarding." The video cut to black. Keanu sat back, eyes full, breath slow. In that moment, there were no lines between actor and role, between stranger and friend. Just one man, deeply seen by another. Keanu was not one for speaking engagements, especially the kind with folding chairs and paper programs. But when the handwritten invitation arrived, no sender name, just "please come, you'll understand." Something in him knew he had to go. He arrived without a handler, dressed simply, stepping into the community center's low-ceilinged hall as a soft murmur rolled through the room. No cameras, no paparazzi, just a sea of everyday people. Studio janitors, aging stuntmen, backstage assistants, and familiar faces from the quieter corners of Hollywood. People who built the stage but never stood on it. At the front of the room stood a simple wooden podium, and to its left, a framed photo of Roy and Matthew, the same one Keanu had placed inside Matthew's place. Below it, a small sign, celebrating Roy, the man who watched over us all. Keanu froze. For a second, he forgot to breathe. This was not a memorial thrown together by a studio. It was organized by the people Roy had helped, comforted, or protected in silence. The same security guards he trained, the elderly neighbor he once helped carry groceries, a prop builder whose son Roy had quietly mentored through grief. One by one, people spoke. A young woman, a first-year PA, told the story of how Roy stayed late one night so she would not walk to her car alone. An old boom mic operator recounted how Roy noticed he was having trouble breathing and insisted on calling an ambulance. Every story echoed the same theme. Roy saw people. He cared when no one else did. When Keanu's turn came, he walked to the podium slowly, heart heavy. He scanned the crowd and paused when he saw it. A chair in the front row, reserved but empty. A sign taped to the backrest read, "For the one who saw Roy." He cleared his throat. "I never really knew Roy's full story," he began. "But I think he knew mine. Not the one on movie posters. The one I carried between takes. Quiet kind. He never asked anything from me. Just stood there guarding, watching. Not because it was his job, but because he believed someone needed to look after the ones who seemed strong." Keanu's voice cracked slightly. "He reminded me that kindness is not always loud. Sometimes it just opens a gate, nods, and disappears. But I saw him, and I will not forget." As he stepped down, the room rose, not in applause but in silence. A silence filled with honor. The city was asleep, but the studio lot still hummed faintly in the distance. Generators thumping, cables coiled like veins behind production life. Keanu stood by the front gate alone. No cameras, no crew, no movement. Just him in the old booth. The place where Roy had once stood night after night, nodding silently as the world passed him by. The glass on the booth was smudged, the metal frame chipped. It had been replaced by an automated card scanner months ago. Cold, efficient, soulless. but the booth itself still remained, half shaded by a lamppost, forgotten like the man who had guarded it. Keanu stepped forward slowly, reaching into his coat. In his hand was a small wooden box, something he had carved himself over the past few weeks in between shoots and trips to Matthew's place. Inside was the original envelope Roy had written, now perfectly pressed and laminated. Alongside it, Keanu had placed a folded copy of the home video still frame. Roy sitting in the recliner, hands clasped. Beneath that, Keanu had written a note of his own. "You guarded me without asking. See you now. And I am still learning how to guard others because of you." He opened the booth door gently, creaked as if resisting. He placed the box on the small desk where Roy used to sit. Then he turned back, standing in the exact place where Roy used to stand. Spine straight, hands behind his back. Keanu stayed there for a long time, not thinking, just being. The wind stirred faintly, brushing against his jacket. He imagined Roy standing beside him, not speaking, just present, steady, reliable, a quiet guardian in a world obsessed with noise. And then Keanu did something simple, something that only Roy would understand. He looked at the empty booth and nodded. Not a big gesture, not theatrical, just a quiet, respectful nod, the way Roy had always done. And then, without a word, Keanu turned and walked away. No music, no crowd, just the soft echo of his footsteps fading into the dark. Behind him, the booth stood still, but now it held something sacred. Memory, message, a legacy guarded by silence.